Okay, this is the second part of this lesson on successful places. So after looking at Sydney, today we're going to look at an area which has been a lot less successful. The area we're looking at is what's called the Rust Belt in the United States. So we're looking at the northeast of the United States. As you can see on the figure, a number of states it covers of New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Kentucky. We'll be looking at some of those places mentioned there as well. There's a video here as well, so if you go to Google Classroom, you will be able to see the link to this particular video, which gives you a bit of a visual idea, visual picture of what the Rust Belt actually looks like. As you can see in the key as well of the figure, the area is quite a substantial area, and some of it is also overlapping with the area where there was a lot of coal mining and industry happening at the same time. So a little bit of background here. The area was also referred to as the manufacturing belt or the factory belt, steel belt, which is different to another area of the United States, more the Midwestern states that are known as the Corn Belt. These are places where a lot of the food is produced for the United States. So this area, the manufacturing belt, the first half of the 20th century, the area had quite a strong economy based around manufacturing. One of the reasons was that it had very good transport links, not only roads but also railways, canals, also using the Great Lakes as a form of transport, but also had quite close by a lot of iron ore deposits as well as coal in the Appalachian Mountains. That resulted in the growth of certain cities such as Chicago and Detroit, and also lots of people moved there from Europe, especially in the sort of big first half of the 20th century. Obviously, after the First World War and the Second World War, a lot of people moved from Europe to North America. Lots of work in those cities. Detroit was known for its car manufacturing, for example. Okay, so after Second World War, so from about the 1950s, the area has gone through sort of continuous economic decline. So a lot of deindustrialization has happened there. So again, very similar to what has happened in parts of the UK. The reasons that happened is sort of similar, sort of slightly different as well, but let's have a look at it. So the first reason for deindustrialization is very similar to what has happened in the UK, competition from overseas, especially in China. So in places like China, it was much cheaper to produce coal and steel, and therefore companies in the United States couldn't compete with them anymore. Also, those companies that were still mining and manufacturing, they tried to cut costs as much as possible. So labor costs were actually quite high. So they tried to mechanize. So to reduce the labor cost, they had to pay. So finally, this is much more a United States reason. Industry also was relocating to the southeastern states, such as Alabama and Texas, because of lower wage costs compared to the Northeast. So what it led to scenes like these, so large sort of areas of what used to be manufacturing plants completely derelict and abandoned. It also led to population decline in various cities. So here on this table, you can see how the population has actually declined of various cities, starting with Detroit. the population between 2000 and 2012 actually dropped by more than a quarter. So the population is now just below 700,000, a few years ago anyway, and a massive 26.6% decrease. And you can see the other various cities and towns mentioned there as well. Youngstown as well, the third one down. We'll come back to that at the end of this lesson as well. Detroit, as I said earlier, famous for its car manufacturing. So in a lesson I would say, okay, how would you present this data? Any thoughts on that? Just think about it a little bit, maybe stop the video here, have a thought about that before you continue. Okay, hopefully you've thought about it a little bit without continuing straight away, but here I'm giving you a selection of graphs of how the percentage population decline could be presented, and obviously there's certain ways of presenting it that are better than others. Think about which one would you go for? Maybe it's right to say that here the line graph, I'm going to show it here, that's not appropriate. Why is it not appropriate? Obviously this is not continuous data, so the data cannot be presented as a line graph here. Pie chart, it's not wrong, it's not very clear to me. You know, I would not go for that. I think this bar chart is a lot better, especially sort of its negative value. So it's going down, giving you a sense of decline. There might be other ways to present it, maybe using geographical information systems. Maybe have a thought about how you would do that. I'll stop there for a bit because I just want to give you an idea, some time to think about it. The way I would do it is maybe you can use a Google a map, for example. You can have a satellite photo, for example, of the northeast of the United States, and you can bring the bar graphs onto that map. So that looks quite clear which area of the northeast are more affected than others. Okay, let's move on. The present state of the US coal industry. So the coal industry is still there, but it only survives because of massive government subsidies, which allows the companies to keep their prices low, and therefore they keep on being able to sell the coal. But the subsidies amount just under $3 billion in 2014-15, quite substantial. So without those subsidies, companies really cannot compete globally, and they would be forced to close. And if that happens, then lots of people will lose their jobs. This will have an impact on local businesses as well, incomes of local government. So this creates what's called a negative multiplier effect. Here at the bottom, I've put a bit of a definition for you to make sure you get that term you know, well embedded in your memory. So it's like a downward spiral or cycle where economic conditions produce less spending and less incentive for businesses to invest, therefore reducing opportunities. The positive side, the Rust Belt region has undergone some economic restructuring, but high-income jobs in the primary and secondary sectors have really been replaced only with some low-wage tertiary jobs in retail and local government. It's important to point out that a lot of the jobs in mining as well as in manufacturing were actually quite well paid. Sometimes you think, okay, they're probably quite low paid, primary, secondary sector jobs, and tertiary and quaternary jobs are highly paid. That's not the case. So primary and secondary sectors used to be quite well paid. Mining, well, especially mining and manufacturing. While tertiary jobs, the majority are in retail, and that's actually quite low paid. Only quaternary sector jobs tend to be quite highly paid. Okay, this is quite a nice figure showing the cycle of decline, so the negative multiplier effect. Have a look at that. It's quite nice how that's sort of explained how everything links together. So the impact of the decline, what has happened, various problems. We looked at earlier, obviously, the population decline, people moving away to other places to find work, and that has also meant a brain drain. The most talented and ambitious people, they migrate elsewhere to seek opportunities elsewhere. What's left is high unemployment, high levels of crime, also high levels of drug abuse. And also what has happened is less money reaching councils. So tax revenue has dropped because consumer spending will fall. In the US, they have most of the money that's made by the council comes from local sales tax. So as less people buy items, they pay less sales tax, and therefore less money comes in. While at the same time, there's an increased spending on welfare payments for the population. Now, looking at sort of politics in a way, since the 1980s, really, presidential candidates have been very interested in these states and whether they can get support from these states. They're what's called swing states. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. So getting support from the population in these states is really important if someone runs for president. And therefore, you can also explain why a person like Donald Trump is very much interested in supporting, say, the coal mining, manufacturing, because a lot of that is supporting these states. Finally, let's have a look at an example of one town in the Rust Belt. It's called Beattyville, Kentucky. It's located in coal country. So the decline of that coal industry has caused many social problems. So as you can see in the 2012 census, Beattyville was one of the poorest towns in the United States. A few indicators. Median annual household income was very low, much lower than the national median. Lots of people living below the poverty line. Education, again, only a third of teenagers left high school without graduating, or a third left without graduating. Very few had college degrees. A lot of homelessness. Drug crime is also very much rife, and one of the problems they have is what's called opioids, which is a video for you on Google Classroom as well. It's very interesting to watch that. So drug overdoses is a massive problem in those states. Male life expectancy 8 years below the US average, so that gives you an indication of the issue, the problems they have. This is a nice video just to give you a bit of an idea of one of those towns where regeneration is starting to happen. So watch that as well on Google Classroom. You will see the links. So a few tasks there for you. First of all, there's as I go back, what I'll do is these tasks, I'll do a separate video on that because time is running out. So I'll create a separate video on the task because I need a little bit more time for that. Okay.